Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Welcome to our AMA with Adam.
Cover.
Cool. Let's start with an icebreaker question, Adam. What
Okay.
is something that you need to do in the morning before you start work?
This is not just a question for me. This is a question for everybody.
Oh, yes, it is a
Yes.
question for everybody. If
Okay.
anyone wants to hop in.
Yeah. Just as we're waiting for people to come in, we like to start with an icebreaker. So if would love to hear from you, like drop it in the chat. But sorry, the question again, Laura, was
What do you need to do in the morning before you can start work as part of your morning routine?
for me, and again, for anyone joining, like would love to hear your answers. So again, just feel free to come off mute if you want to tell us, or you can drop it in the chat. But for me, like I need to vacuum. So like I cannot sit down at a chair and start doing work if I haven't vacuumed. This is after like getting my two kids to school. They make crumbs. And like I don't know, like if I'm sitting in the chair and looking around and seeing the crumbs, like I have to stand up and vacuum. So I don't know if it's an obsessive compulsive thing, but like it's a need for me. I see some people meditating, drinking coffee, awesome. Gym and walk the dog, awesome. I'm seeing a lot of people taking care of the health. Coffee,
Yeah.
yes. For me, coffee
Coffee.
comes like later. I just don't understand drinking coffee right out of bed or right out of like in the morning. Make my bed. I think Laura, you were talking about making your bed.
Yeah, I like having a nicely made bed before I can start work. And I don't like anything on the bed. Like,
Oh.
my kid likes to like jump in and like, put books everywhere and stuff. And I just need to get rid of it all.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We have, you sure you don't have like, I've got, I don't know, my wife has like a dozen pillows and they have to be placed just so. So like when I'm making the bed, I have to make sure to replicate the proper pillow patterns.
Yeah,
Breakfast.
yeah, I know my partner, I definitely, he doesn't make it nice and smooth, he just like puts the covers over and it's not smooth. That drives me nuts. But
just for those people coming in, we're just exchanging or talking about what is the thing you have to do in the morning before you start work. Thanks everyone for sharing what are the things you have to do in the morning before you start. But just as we wait for people to come in, we like to do a little icebreaker. Maybe there was another question, Laura.
Yeah. Okay. Let's think of one. What's another good one? Let's see.
Maybe like a
Oh,
vacation destination.
I was just about to say that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting. What's a good vacation destination? I think Costa Rica is a good one. I would enjoy that. I would enjoy going there.
Kid friendly. So this is a selfish one because my wife and I are talking about like getting away. So since there are 46 people on the call, I can crowdsource a good answer, and my wife will be very proud of me for coming up for being proactive with good recommendations. So like a place you'd recommend to go on vacation, let's say a week. Right now, our leading option is like an all-inclusive thing.
Ooh, interesting. For me, I still think Costa Rica is pretty kid friendly. It's fun. It's got nice weather, nice beaches. I'm all for that place.
Anyone else out in the group? Place that you always recommend to your friends or family to go on vacation? Feel free to drop it in the chat if you got a place you just love to visit. Right. How long is a trip to Hawaii? It's like 12 hours flying or something.
Yeah, for the East Coasters, it's a long haul, but
Okay.
West Coast, it's shorter. It's like 4.5.
Oh, okay. So you just got to get to the West Coast, then it's easier.
Yeah.
Come to New Zealand, sure. These are great recommendations. I've never heard of. I'll probably won't pronounce this correctly. Tenerife. I've never heard of that, but like now, taking the list down. So I'll make sure to look at them. Thank you I thank you everyone for your recommendations. Spanish
Awesome.
Island. Very cool. Okay. I'll have to take a look at that. I'm surprised I haven't heard of it before. I have family in Spain. So we're probably close to the group.
Yeah.
Algarve, yes. Awesome. Great recommendation. I've been there years ago. Do we want to get going, or what do you want to do, Laura?
Yeah, I think now's a great time to get going. So thank you everybody for getting your question. So we welcome like any feedback that you have in regards to, how the flow is, what questions we go through, etc. The questions that we'll touch on at the beginning are the questions that have appeared more than once. We got a lot of similar questions come through, and then we had some really unique questions come in as well. So we're going to try and get through them, but there's a chance we might not be able to, but we just want to thank you all for submitting them and being here as we go through this. So we'll just start with a little introduction to Adam. I'll let him talk about how awesome he is, but you can go ahead, Adam.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. I'm really glad to lead us through a discussion or conversation around user onboarding. It's my favorite topic. I got into this topic when I started leading user onboarding at Shopify for the retail segment there, learned a ton about, what does it take to help merchants get up and running? What are the biggest challenges that faced, especially in like high volume, high velocity onboarding programs? What was really cool for me is like when I was kind of coming out of Shopify, I started talking a lot about user onboarding, didn't really realize that a lot of the vernacular and a lot of the philosophies and principles were very similar to product-led growth. So that's what led me to meet, the fine team here at ProductLed. And then I joined as a product-led coach, and I talked to teams about, how to strategize, launch, and optimize their product-led growth program. But what's interesting for me is like I see these philosophies or these frameworks the same, whether it's a sales-led business or a product-led business. We're all just trying to help our users get through, how can they make a good evaluation of whether this product is right for them, get them up and running on the product, and ultimately having users be successful with the product. And like whether it's a PLG business or a sales-led business, like I think those needs are effectively the same. So that's what gets me excited about this topic. I'm happy to lead all of you through this discussion. I think one thing that's a little weird with an AMA format, it's like sometimes feels very one directional, like I'll be talking and you'll be listening, and I don't love that. So I've got the chat up in front of me, I've got the slides up in front of me. We're going to do our best to cover a bunch of the questions that were already sent in, but like I certainly don't want it to be one way. So as we talk about topics, would love to hear from all of you, either encourage you to come off mute and share your perspectives or ideas, or drop it in the channel. And I'll encourage this throughout the course of the discussion today. Make sure that you get what you need out of this AMA, and happy to get into some tactical things. Maybe we'll find ourselves in a moment where we put a pin in a topic, or we can follow up offline through email or Slack or whatever else. But I just wanted to set the framework for like today's intended to be a discussion.
For sure. And I'll just kind of go through, how this is going to work. So we'll go through those submissions for about 45 minutes. Hopefully that'll cover a good chunk of them. And then for the last 15 minutes, we're just going to open up the floor to you, so you have the opportunity to ask questions live and get Adam's feedback if you didn't have a chance to submit them beforehand. So yeah. We'll start with the first question.
Maybe before we dive in, just a quick poll, and if you could just drop it in the chat. I'm just curious, like how many people here are thinking about onboarding from a PLG perspective versus a sales-led. If you could just drop in the chat like PLG or sales-led. I just want to get a quick temperature check of like what people are thinking. Okay, PLG seems to be the leading. Yep. Okay, PLG exclamation point, hybrid, mobile apps, sales. Okay. So like as we go through and talk about these topics, I may lean more heavily one way or the other. If you want to hear maybe some extra perspective on the sales side, feel free to jump in. I'm happy to offer my perspective on that as well. Okay, majority PLG though. Okay, great.
Awesome. All right. So the first question that we got a few of is how to improve TTV, which is time to value.
time to value. So I think this is a great place to start the conversation, because this is, I think, what we're all trying to tackle. It's like, hey, we've got this product. We're seeing that our users are challenged getting up and running. We want to make that faster. We know like so much about PLG is about like velocity and momentum. You've got this kind of like 5-minute window where we have to deliver value. And if we can't deliver value in 5 minutes, then we lose the user, and conversion rates are hard to get by, and we're building top of funnel, like tons of challenges. So I think this is a great place to start the conversation. A few philosophies I try to lead with are, one, like onboarding is not configuration. I talk with a variety of companies through ProductLed and in my own kind of consulting and coaching. And a lot of times I see that companies are trying to help users like do this full configuration suite or experience like all the value at the same time. And like that's definitely not conducive to momentum building. So the first kind of high level philosophy is like onboarding is not configuration. The second philosophy is that like obvious to me isn't obvious. So the challenge is like when you're so close to your product, whether you're a product manager or a designer or an engineer, like whatever, or a marketer, you're so close to your product that you feel like it should be obvious to a user that they should click this button or turn this crank or upload a thing. And those things are just not true. So the way we typically recommend or areas I encourage people to explore are a bunch of things. So I'm going to, as we go through the discussion today, I'll do my best to like share examples. And then if you want to go into more depth, if any of you want to go into more depth, again, please just ask your questions in the chat. A couple of exercises you can do with your team to improve time to value is this red, yellow, green exercise. We actually do this exercise through the ProductLed Accelerator program. And the idea is like, come up with a list like of all the different things you think your users need to do, and then indicate them as like red, yellow, and green. So red are like, why are we doing this? This is not really necessary. Yellow is, can we do this task later, this step later? And green is like, this is a critical step. We have to keep this step. And the yellow ones are actually the most interesting ones to me, because a lot of this is about like, hey, if this is a yellow step, can we do it later? Or can we do this for the user? So, to give you a couple examples of like how this works in the wild, when I was at Shopify, I was leading user onboarding. One of the biggest challenges we had was data migration. So merchants who were trying to come over to Shopify from some other system, they were really, really struggling with moving data over. And we actually saw that like that's where merchants were getting stuck in our onboarding funnel. And so what we ended up doing is we built this whole data migration program. And the outcome of that was we basically took data migration off of the things that the merchant needed to do. So we would move all their data over. All they had to do was like send us a CSV of all their product information. And we had a team that would like do all the product transformation, then pop it back into Shopify. And we basically eliminated data migration as like an onboarding, as a churn reason in onboarding, all because we just said like, hey, let's just eliminate this from the user and what they have to do it. And really the observation there that I think is like more extensible is one-time setup steps that are low value are things you should consider eliminating from the user and from onboarding. Like onboarding should more focus on like, how do we teach users to do the repeatable thing they've come to our product to do, less on like, how do we teach users to do these one-time low value setup steps. So I wanted to share that data migration example. Other companies I've worked with, we were collecting like banking information. It was a fintech company. We were collecting banking information as part of onboarding, but that banking information wasn't needed in the user journey until much later. So we actually stopped collecting the banking information at the front of the experience and pushed it all the way out to the end. Some other things to think about to improve time to value is not just focusing on like functional jobs to be done, like, hey, user, you need to click this button and do this thing, but also emotional jobs to be done. So it's like, what is my user feeling right now? How do I help them overcome the friction of like how they're feeling? Like, is my team gonna like using this new tool, or like, how am I gonna actually be able to solve this problem? So meeting users at an emotional place is a great way to do it. I've come up proactive objection handling. So if you know the top 3 reasons why your customers are getting stuck, let's be proactive about it. Let's message them and say like, hey, this step 2 is the hardest step. We know it's going to take you 10 minutes or 20 minutes to do this setup, like best to get ahead of it. Templates are a great way to do it. So you'll see a lot of examples of that through like Canva or Miro, where as you go through their onboarding, you can like use templates to like basically fast track the user experience. In product guides, also another great way to do it. I'll pause there. I said a bunch of stuff about time to value. Any questions or things I can go into more detail, please come off mute or feel free to drop it in the chat. Brittany, I see your message about what if data migration is via API. On top of my head, I don't have a great answer for you, but maybe Brittany, like, let's connect after and we can kind of talk together about, like, you know, what's a creative way to overcome that. But maybe I'll just pause for a second. Questions, anything else I can go into more detail? If there's anything, like, please feel free to drop it in the chat. How do you tackle the emotional blockers? For me, I just try to think about users and customers as humans. So I try to acknowledge that they exist. So for example, I'm working with a company right now that's in, like, product operations. So, like, you know, think of like a Kanban experience that you'd use with your product and engineering team. Switching that process over for your team has a big emotional connection to it. It's like, will my team like my new recommendation for this change? And so what we're basically experimenting with is, like, if we're really proactive with saying, like, you know, here's a 3-step guide about how to have this conversation with your team. You know, one, we're meeting them at a challenge, which is like, hey, maybe you as an individual like this new workflow, but your team won't like it. So, like, how do we help you have that conversation? But second, like, we're acknowledging that that emotional thing exists, and that, like, you could get pushback, like how to deal with the pushback, how to deal with criticism. So I don't know if that's if that addresses your question, Saptarishi, but that's you know, current one that I'm facing right now. Maybe we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. All right. So this one is another question came up a lot is, what's a process to define your aha moment? And maybe just talk briefly about aha moment. I'm sure most people know what it is, but it would be a good refresher.
So I use, like, aha moment, onboarded, activation, like those words are pretty synonymous for me. And my definition is some moment in the user journey where the user feels like they've made the right decision for them around a product. And, like, it's really nebulous. You know, the process to define the aha moment, it's less important to define the aha moment the first time. It's more important, in my opinion, to give you and your team a way of how you will find it. So, you know, I'll try to anchor us with a couple, like, well-known examples. Like Facebook, I think their aha moment was when you've added 8 friends and posted, like, 2 times on Facebook. Slack, I think their aha moment was something about, like, you know, the users have sent a collective 2,000 messages. You can definitely think of the aha moment as a bit of a growth lever, or it's more rooted maybe in some data that says, like, users who meet this milestone are likely to continue to be users for an extended period of time. And what we're trying to figure out is, like, okay, what is that moment? So the way I like to think about the process for it is either one, like, you've done some data analysis and you're starting to see users who do X go on and to do Y, or, like, so users who hit this volume of feature usage, we're seeing are staying with our product for the next 6 to 8 months. Or if you absent data, then you just have a hypothesis. So I'll share, like, an example I'm going through right now. There's a team I'm working with. We're trying to figure this team particular's focus is, like, converting trial to paid, or improving conversion of trial to paid. And in the discussion, you know, it's like myself, someone from CS, someone from marketing, someone from product, like, you know, it's very cross-functional discussion. We were debating for a long time, like, hey, is paid actually the aha moment? Is when a user becomes paid aha? And the answer across the team is, like, no, we know it's not, because just because someone becomes paid doesn't mean they're going to, you know, avoid churn or be long-term value. But what was more important for us is, like, we set a shared definition, something we could work toward for a period of time. So, you know, we're going to try to improve trial to paid for the next 6 months. But what's naturally going to happen is we're going to start saying, well, what happens after they become paid? Well, it's like we're seeing we doubled trial to paid conversion, but we're actually seeing, like, churn continue to be high. And so what we know is, like, our definition of aha, we didn't go far enough in the journey. So if you think more broadly about, like, if a user gives me their email and password, that's probably not the right aha, and you probably have a really high conversion rate there. And users who are, 12 months paying us is probably like too long a definition. So like somewhere in between there is kind of that aha moment. And what's more important is designing the process of how you'll continue to experiment to find it. And so some metrics I like to use are activation velocity. So activation velocity is given a set of 100 users, let's say, that signed up for your product in January, what percentage of them go on to become paid, and like how long did it take them to do that? And if you take that approach and say, and look at, how long does it take them to become like signed up users, or how long did it take them to become like, use our product, send 2,000 messages in the example of Slack, you'll start seeing like what emerges is this like velocity chart of how long it takes. Anything that's like happening really fast, you're probably too early in the process. Anything that's taking a long time, you may be too late, or that's exactly the right definition. You should work on improving conversion steps along that journey to improve, the velocity for those cohorts. I'll pause there. I said a bunch of things. Happy to go into a little more tactical detail. But like any new ideas or like light bulbs going off in the group that I can go that you want to surface or ask for clarity? Feel free to come up, mute, and ask, or just drop it in the chat. So there's a question from Susan. How do you handle this when you're in enterprise and your onboarding users aren't going to convert? Can you share a little bit more about that, Susan? Do you mind coming off chat and providing a little more color?
Absolutely. So as I said, I work in an enterprise product, which basically means that my users have not chosen, their job has chosen for them, and they're logging in, and I want them to be successful users and be happy using my product. But that's the challenge I've had, right? Like, what is their aha moment? What is their conversion rate? Because they aren't choosing to be here. Like, what does the happy user look like?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. For me, the philosophies are the same. So like the business has made a decision to adopt your software, and they're basically forcing users to use it. So like top of mind, what comes up is like Salesforce, right? Like, CRO decides the business is switching to Salesforce. Everybody from sales has to move to Salesforce. There's a ton of friction there. Like, how do we teach all the salespeople how to get like value from Salesforce? The underlying questions are still the same. Like, okay, how is this user going to get value from this system? It starts with like your understanding, your teammates, like, why is this valuable for that user? And then building, I typically like to recommend that we think about onboarding the same way we think about like a sales funnel. So it's like, hey, there's 5 steps to this funnel. We know that the 5 key steps are A, B, C, and D. Let's start monitoring how users are going through that funnel. Where are they getting stuck? Okay, let's tackle that. All where the end of the funnel is like the user is demonstrating a certain level of usage that you would tie as being like a good indicator to like receiving value. So the philosophies are the same. I actually find like when you're in a post-sales onboarding program, you get the luxury of time, whereas in PLG you don't, because like typically you're looking at like a free trial period of like 2 weeks to 30 days, or you have like a 30-day free trial, or even in freemium, it's like, hey, they've adopted freemium. Now I've got tons of time to try to convert them into paid. So you actually have the benefit of time. The way I've done this in the past is I look for the top 3 reasons that users are getting stuck, and I try to attack those 3, 1 or 2 of those at a time. So I gave the example earlier on about like data migration. The way we figured that out is my team, who was talking to merchants every day, I'd ask like, what are the top 2 or 3 things you find you're repeating every single day over and over again? And it's like data migration, data migration, data migration. Okay, great. Let's start monitoring for data migration challenges. So we took our 5 steps of funnel. One of the steps was like data migration, and we just saw like users were sitting in that stage, and that stage was just ballooning. And so we said, okay, well, what are the things we can do to help unstick them? So we started building like webinars. We started building like very specific like additional content, and then we ended up building this whole data migration program where we just took it off their hands. We just figured we're not getting them through this fast enough. Everyone hates doing it. Like, we'll just do it for them. So I don't know, Susan, if that gives you like a couple of maybe tactical things to think about, but I'll pause there. Like, how does that sit for you?
I was trying to write really fast.
Yeah, I mean, we're recorded, so like you definitely watch the recording again if you feel like you can't keep up.
I think it's fantastic though. Thank you.
For sure. I know there's another questions. Maybe we'll move on to the next one, and then we'll just try to take like a question per slide. Can you read the question, Laura?
Laura, you're on mute.
No.
Apologies, everybody. So how would you approach low touch onboarding for a product that can't be entirely self-service and needs touch?
So there's a bunch of things. I think I've touched on a few things just like in the discussion moments ago with Sarah, or Susan, sorry. So I think the standard that like entirely self-service is a very high standard. I think there's a lot of product-led content that talks about like no touch, and like if you have a human touch in a self-serve motion, like you're doing it wrong. And like I just don't believe that that's true. I think the underlining challenge with like onboarding, sales, like basically trying to run your business is like your users are getting stuck making decisions or figuring out if your product is right for them. And we can unstick them through, you know, marketing, through the product, or through like human touches. And ultimately, you know, sometimes product is really good at unsticking users, sometimes marketing is really good at unsticking users, and sometimes a human touch is really good at unsticking users. So like for me, I never hold back one or the other, but I try to find opportunities to speed up velocity and momentum. And sometimes you do that by replacing a human touch with something else. But I don't know, for me, I try to work with like my, you know, companies I work with or companies I've worked at in the past, setting expectations with leadership that like the path to getting really good at this is not through eliminating human touches. We just want to be mindful of what those human touches are about. So, you know, I talked about like what are the top 3 to 5 reasons user gets stuck. Building out like webinars, packaging content, and then giving them like really easy, simple ways to like escalate to a human touch. Like those are great ways to experiment. There's probably a ton of stuff in your product that is actually like low level of complexity that users can do on their own, but like the product may not offer, you know, the product is not obvious. And so like that's a perfect opportunity if you wanted to do like in product guidance where you're like pushing knowledge to the user about like, hey, click this button, turn this crank now. This is why it's important. Being able to highly coordinated between marketing and your product is also important. So if you know the top 3 or 5 things users need to do to go through onboarding, it's important that like your marketing touches are talking about those things, and so is your product, and so are your human touches. And like those things well coordinated together definitely can improve the velocity of low touch. So, you know, another example I'll share similar, like within my Shopify days, we were experimenting with like a low touch program. This was happening at the height of COVID. We had a huge influx of retail merchants who were just trying to get up and running on anything because, you know, their in-person stores were closing. And we basically had to build like a low touch program. And so we started like very, very simple. We just said like, hey, we know the 12 to 15 steps that merchants need to do because we talk to them every day. We're going to package that into a 12-step marketing drip campaign, and we're just going to send it to every merchant. And we're going to monitor whether those merchants kind of get through that funnel I described earlier. And if they come out the other side, and we're just going to measure how long it takes them to come through the funnel and whether they come out the funnel on the other side at all. And what we found is merchants actually were going through the funnel faster in low touch than our higher touch, and a higher percentage of merchants were activating versus our high touch program. And so one of our hypotheses was like, we're actually getting in the way, that like, because we're setting the pace with our merchants, we are slowing them down. And if we got out of their way, they could go faster. It didn't mean that we were avoiding them. So every email touch that we sent out had like a call to action at the bottom that's like, reply to this email, we will help you. We weren't trying to like gate them. We were just saying like, hey, what if we got out of their way? So it ended up being a very successful experiment. We ended up using that kind of low touch program for an extended period of time, but we didn't avoid talking to them. We just were a little more reactive on it. It's like, hey, if you need us, reply to this email. We'll be there to answer your questions. I'll pause there. Any additional comments I can make on that? Or is there kind of a new light bulb moment for anyone out there that wants to go into this one in a little more detail? Feel free to come off mute and ask, or just drop it in the chat.
I was just going to say that in the beginning, when you're trying to develop the product and the onboarding, it's okay to actually spend a lot of time helping and hand holding, as long as you know you're eventually going to graduate beyond that. Because you learn a lot about the process and the customer and what's important to them.
Yes,
More of a
totally
comment, I
agree.
guess.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's a great comment. You know, I'll have conversations with companies who are, you know, their top of funnel is like, let's say 50 a month, and they're already asking me like, how do they scale onboarding? There isn't a magic number, but I think there's a ton of benefit, just to reiterate what you're saying, there's a ton of benefit of having your team talking to customers as much as possible, because you're trying to figure out like, what are those repeatable sticking points? And, you know, I mentioned before, like the team, in my opinion, that is not as well utilized as it could be is like CS and support. They know the top 3 to 5 reasons why your customers are getting stuck, because they're fielding that question all the time. And so it's like, okay, now that we know those top 3 to 5 reasons, you can have you know, a creative brainstorming session with your marketing team, with your CS team, with your product team. Like, how might we think about unsticking users when those things are happening? Like, can we do in product guidance? Like, let's use a tool like an AppQues or a Pendo. We're going to start like proactively nudging users along in those moments. We're going to build our marketing campaigns where we're going to do the proactive objection handling. We're going to say, hey, the next step is this step. This step is really hard to do. Here are the top 3 ways to get over this step together. If you get stuck, schedule a call with our CS person, or like, here's a 5-minute webinar or a video that you've embedded into email that walks people through it. Whatever you can do to proactively help them get through that step, but you don't know they're there. And so CS and support has that kind of visibility. I find challenges, product teams who are really data oriented, who are like well instrumented, they'll see like this drop off in the process, but they won't know why. And then they'll sit and spin and be like, well, why do we think this is happening? It could be this. We're going to implement full story and watch users fall off. Like, all those are great tools, but like your CS and support team know the answers. So the more time you spend with your customers talking to them, like the better. You just have like a shortcut to everything. Any other questions on this topic?
We had one question come
Yeah.
through. How are you placing live help into the UX?
So I talked about like in product guidance. So like that's something I would definitely explore. If you're doing any kind of like empty states are scary. Some users want to explore. I'm the kind of person that I like to explore, just like give me access to the thing and I'm going to go play around with it. But I don't know that I'm the norm or not the norm, but you know, I mentioned earlier in the discussion that like obvious to me is not obvious. And so like empty states and like, oh, users will figure it out when they click things. Like, I wouldn't default to that. I would default to the person, give guidance to everyone, and the people who don't need guidance will ignore it or they'll close it out. But if you don't give it to them, the people who do need guidance will never figure it out. And so you're kind of like, if you don't default to guidance, you're giving yourself, you're only addressing the needs of, you know, let's say half your users. I don't know, makes Bridget, that fully answers your question, but like, if we want to go into more detail on that, like, let's find a way to follow up after this call.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, let's move on to the next question. Okay, another really popular one. What metrics should you be tracking to determine the optimal onboarding process?
This is a very challenging one. Out of the gate, I don't want to set expectations that like you can't track things if you are not like fully and perfectly instrumented. You just need to start somewhere. So I'll share a little bit about like the things that my favorite ways of doing this, but take it with a big grain of salt that like, you don't have to be perfectly instrumented. You don't have to be monitoring everything to start being more like data hungry about like how you're tracking onboarding. What's most important is to start. So you can either start with the data, which is like, we have a bunch of users going through the system. We're seeing the following 5 features are the ones that are like being used within the first 15 days or 30 days. We're seeing that these are the most used features, and like we want to start optimizing for those things. Or you start with a hypothesis, which is like, I think that these are the top 3 features that are being used, and we want to go and spend more time figuring out Are those features highly correlated to users either becoming paid or users becoming sticky? Another comment I want to make is like the aha moment doesn't necessarily have to be your economic moment when users become paid. You can definitely choose that option, but it doesn't have to be that one. So what I'll share is like the way that I think about building out these metrics. So the first one is like I want to look at usage. So how much of a particular feature is being used by a user or a set of users. The next is I want to look at conversion. So users who do X then go on to do Y. Then I look at the velocity. So how long does it take a user to go from X to Y? And then I like to look at distribution. So I say, of all users that went from X to Y, what percentage of users did that in 1 minute versus 5 minutes versus 10 minutes versus 20 minutes? And then the last thing I want to do is I want to create a way to compare like different segments of users. So I'll give you an example of what I'm working on right now. A company I'm working with, I was just doing some analysis in Mixpanel, looking for like these kinds of signs of life around usage. And I found that users who were paid users were performing a particular product action more than 10 times. Whereas users who were in trial were performing a particular product action less than 10 times. I'm simplifying it. And the example there is, I was looking at a particular feature. So the use of a feature, I was looking at like how I was comparing them as I was like, hey, is there behavior of a user that's paid that's different enough than the behavior of a user who is trialing? And then I looked at like, what is the number, like the distribution. So like users who use this feature 0 to 10 times, 10 to 20 or greater than 20. And what I found is users who were paid were using the features more than 3 times more than users who were trialing more than 10 times. I know that's like a mouthful, but my approach is the same. So like, as I look around for like other signs of life around what are the different moments within the usage, I'm using that same framework of like, okay, what's the feature? Is there conversion or not? What's the velocity? How long does it take them to convert? And then am I seeing distribution? The reason I look at distribution is like, I just don't like averages. There's no insights in averages. So to say, hey, on average, it takes a user 10 minutes to go from step 1 to step 2 or step X to step Y. What I want to look at is like, okay, what percentage of users go from step X to step Y within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And like, that gives me a sense of like how hard it is for users to do the thing. That's more of an indicator to me that like, hey, I'm actually seeing 10% of users do this really fast. Why are those 10% of users doing it really fast and the 90% taking too long? Is it actually too hard to do X to Y? Or is there something special about the 10% of users who are doing X to Y really fast that I need to model other behavior for other users like them? So I've gone into like a bunch of detail there. I don't know if that fully sits with the group, but I'll pause there again, ask for any feedback or anything I can go into a little more detail about. I see Jamie asked a question. Working backwards, love this recommendation. I should have called it out earlier. A huge opportunity in building onboarding is actually to work backwards, start from the aha moment or the value moment, and then ask like, what's one thing that would have to be true one step before? So love that you shared that, Jamie. Thank you. Any question? Maybe someone wants to come off mute or add a comment about the topic about metrics. Otherwise, we can move on.
All right, next one. Okay, we have in-product onboarding and email onboarding. How do I know which channel is making an impact and where are the weak points?
For me, like onboarding, I think I mentioned it before, is like this, it's a cross-functional thing. Like there's ways that product can help users onboard. There's ways that human touches can help users onboard. There's way that marketing can help users onboard. Depending on where you are in like the sophistication of your business, you may try to optimize like, hey, we want to see if marketing is having a greater impact than product is on like onboarding. My perspective is it's more important to align those teams on the 3 to 5 key things that you are trying to improve in onboarding and make sure you're well coordinated there. So there's a team I'm working with right now. We know what the 3 or 5 key things are. And so when I'm working with the person who's kind of leading the marketing piece of the work, we're saying like, hey, how are these 3 to 5 things showing up in our, 8-step marketing led onboarding program? And are our calls to action equivalent to the calls to action we're making in the product, where we want users to use a certain feature or do a certain thing? And then are we, we have like a live chat. So it's like, hey, can we kind of raise the live chat to the user when they're in that moment and say like, hey, we know this feature, this particular action is hard to do. Feel free to like hit us here on the live chat and we're going to help you get through that thing. So for me, it's actually more important that that the teams are really well coordinated, that like, hey, there's 3 things that we're focused on as a group. The reason is, one, like the business, like when I talk to like CEOs or whatever, they just want the outcomes. They just want to know like, hey, we're improving, onboarding rates. The second is it's really, really hard to attribute whether the marketing channel was the way that improved it. It's not that you can't. That's why I preface with like, it matters like how sophisticated you are as a business. It just sets like a really high standard if you're trying to figure out like, is it marketing or is it other? What I will say is I'm a big fan of like leading indicators. So if I'm rebuilding like a marketing led onboarding program, I'm looking for the basic leading indicators. Like, are users opening the emails? Are users clicking through our CTAs? Which CTAs are they clicking through? If it's possible within your instrumentation that you can see the attribution, it's like, okay, users clicked through this email and then went into the product action. Amazing. It's just a very high standard of instrumentation. That's really, really hard to get to. But like leading indicators are really important. Are users clicking things? Are users like following through? Then you can figure out, okay, but why? Like, so we're seeing an increase in click through in our marketing led onboarding, fantastic, but we're not seeing usage of the feature go up. Okay, we think that there's something wrong in the product because we're clearly driving users to get into the product, but like they're not doing the thing. I don't know if I've fully hit the nail on the head for you, whoever asked this question. But again, I'll pause there and ask for, any kind of follow-up questions or anything else I can go into more detail on. Again, feel free to come off mute or just drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on that. So, a lot of the experimentation, it sounds like people do is, sort of combination of observation, intuition, trial and error. Do you know of any or recommend any tools maybe that use maybe, computer logic to kind of help tease out for you some of these relationships, and rather than just kind of stabbing around?
Personally, no. Like, but that could be like, so a bit about me, like I'm very much just like an analyst at heart. I love just like playing in data. So it just may be that like I'm blind to these other like shortcuts that exist because like I just love seeking the insights. But like for me, I'm constantly just looking for signs of life around data. So I'd say that's another, consideration, which is like I'm always just looking for signs of life. Like, hey, I'm seeing in this really small sample of users, like something unique is happening. I want to spend more time exploring that because there's a sign of life that it's working, versus, I'm less sensitive to like large statistically significant A/B testing that tells me A and B. Like it's great if you've got the volume. If you don't have the volume, then, A/B testing becomes difficult. But I'm just big on like, hey, I've got a hypothesis, I've got some data. Like I want to go and explore one level deeper, whether there's a good relationship between these two things. I see Jamie, you posted June.so. I'll add that to my personal list. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Okay, this one is hot topic. How and when do you get the sales team involved?
My instinct is always, I mentioned before, users are just trying to figure out whether your product is right for them. And we can help them figure that out through like marketing, through product, and through human touches. Like sales is a very particular kind of human touch. If you're reading a lot about like PLG and like, there's a ton on product-led sales and like, what does that mean? Ultimately, I think like sales does something really unique. They're really good at painting a vision for the future for people. Like that's where I think sales is like excellent. More sales assist or product-led sales, these are more like product experts who are maybe helping you overcome like some configuration or discovery around your product. But in either camp, the question is like, where is the user getting stuck? Are they stuck because they just can't visualize what their future looks like on this software because maybe it's too hard? Great. Maybe that's a great point for sales to get involved. Are they, is it a particularly complex buy that's very expensive? Then yes, like sales is typically involved because, you know, teams need to feel really good about spending multiple thousands of dollars on making a decision about a product. And again, like sales is there to kind of be that Sherpa, that person that helps them go through the decision-making process when the decision is opaque. PLG is great for situations where you can really evaluate quite quickly whether it fits for you or not. Now, you know, this emerging like product-led sales and product qualified accounts, I think is a great way that like PLG and SLG work together. And you know, the typical playbook is like, hey, there's a bunch of things that we see in the product that users are doing that suggest they're behaving like paid users, or that they're behaving in a way that we think they can extract more value out of our product than just the one layer of product they're playing with. And so, you know, we want to deploy sales to them. So ways you do that is you want to escalate like, you know, lists of users who are using certain level of features. There's a handful of tools out there right now that are in like this product-led sales space that are trying to like surface data out of Mixpanel and out of like the other product engagement tools. But like for me, I just love bringing sales along the ride. So like I want them to know like, here's what I'm learning from users. Here's where I'm seeing users get stuck. Here's how I'm thinking about pushing users to you sales so you can, you know, outbound to them. And they love that because like they love, you know, the funnel, like they want more leads. And they also love it because I'm saying like, hey, I'm kind of pseudo qualifying them for you. So I'm not just sending you everyone. And there's, you know, simple ways to do that. Like right now I'm in the process of just like I export lists once a week and send it to sales. And like, here's the new list of emails to go after. You know, in a more sophisticated business, you may have really well instrumented from like your product engagement data to like your CRM. So I'll pause there, said a bunch of things. Again, like anything I can go into more detail or any kind of questions that kind of are new as a result of things I'm saying. Thanks, Jamie.
All right. Let's
Maybe
hit one more.
Maybe we'll switch to like more of the live Q&A. Just like looking at time, I think we were a little slow out of the gate. So
yeah.
You know, we recognize that this is over your, for those in the Eastern time zone, this is, you know, over your lunch break. So if you want to head out, now's a great time. Really appreciate everyone showing up, and you know, the volume of chatter in the chat has been awesome, but we wanted to reserve like the last few minutes for more of just like live AMA. So if you have questions, come off mute, happy to take them. Otherwise, really appreciate you joining. Maybe before we let you go, we can go back to the coaching slide. And we skipped over it. So at ProductLed, we've been, you know, we work with a ton of companies who are trying to figure out is product-led growth right for them. And we have this 4-week accelerator program that we take tons of companies through. What we find is that, you know, we build a ton of momentum coming out of accelerator program, and that companies are looking for a little more hands-on support. So we've started experimenting with this like product-led coaching program. Basically what that looks like for you is if you feel like you can move faster and we can, you know, overcome certain challenges or barriers, working closely with a product-led coach like myself, you know, we're packaging a service like that for you. So if you're curious about this, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the folks here currently representing ProductLed. Happy to walk you through like what this looks like, you know, the kind of scope that we can help you with. You know, there's no boundaries on any of that stuff. And like right now we do offer, you know, 30-minute like consult just to get to better know like, hey, what's going on in your world? Why do you think this is the right time to get a coach? And we really just want to hear about like some of the context of what you're challenged with at work. So if any of this is of interest, feel free to message us out. Or maybe Laura, is there a better way that people can contact us than just like, you know, email one of us?
Yeah, they can send through an email, or on our site there is a little, you can go book a call on our site too if that's of interest.
So if you go to productled.com/coaching, there's a microsite there that has a little more detail on this. But otherwise, like happy to switch to more you know, live AMA.
I have a question. One of the things I'm struggling with right now is the mindset with which to approach experiments.
Okay.
Right? Especially when we are trying to either retain users or keep them coming back, or just let them not disappear for months at a time. So do you have any framework that you use or you have used to create experiments so that, you know, in a way that's consistent, that anyone can plug in and is able to, you know how to gather insights so that you come to the right conclusions? I hope that.
Yeah. Like I can tell you how I'm doing it, you know, recently, and you can tell me how it fits for you. I think one of the big challenges of experiments is just making them overly complex to measure. So I like to start with, like, you know, high level, like, what's the thing that we're observing that we want to improve? So it's like, I want to improve, you know, trial to paid conversion. How can we experiment to prove that? That experiment is way too big. It's way too complex. So we need to boil it down to something a lot simpler. So I try to get as simple as possible. Like, if we were to improve trial to paid conversion, what would need to be true? You know, an experiment is like, we really think that using a particular feature more is highly correlated to users becoming paid. So we're going to experiment with how people can discover or use a feature. Okay, that feels a little more tangible. It's a little simpler. How are we measuring usage of that thing today? Can we measure it today? If you can't measure it today, then my recommendation is to, like, come up with a really simple way to measure it. Measuring for me doesn't have to be like, oh, we instrument a tool. It's like, can we count that? Like, is there a way that we can actually count it? So for example, you may want to run an experiment like, we want to increase the number of people who are booking like live onboarding calls. Well, how do they do that today? Well, we send them a Calendly and then they book. Okay, great. For the next 4 weeks, every week, we're going to count how many Calendly bookings we've had every week. And like, that's our baseline. So now you have like a really lo-fi way of like measuring current behavior. Then you're going to make some changes. We're going to change some marketing copy, or we're going to be really forceful with scheduling bookings, because we're going to push like a bunch of like notices in the app that's going to push people to scheduling bookings. And we're just going to monitor for the leading indicator. Did more people set up, like, schedule a Calendly than the 4 weeks previous? So you know, that's an example where it's like, hey, how can we really simplify how we measure, that holding ourselves accountable, that at the end of the period of the experiment, we will have come back and said like, hey, here's how the number has changed. And that you've made it simple for yourself to do. What will emerge from there is you'll say like, hey, we actually saw an increase in onboarding books. Okay, great. So like, what's the next experiment? Do we want to double down on that and see like we can increase it again? How else can we drive users to schedule onboarding bookings? Or is it like, now that we're scheduling bookings more, what's the next thing we want them to do? Well, it's like, okay, well, what we'd actually like them to do is to set up something during the onboarding program. Okay, great. Like, how would we measure that today? We measure that because you know, we're going to ask the person who runs the live onboarding sessions to actually like go into, like, I do this in Notion with a company. We have a really ugly table that's just like every week with like, what are the actions? And we measure like, how many times how many onboarding calls did you have? And on that call, did they configure the thing, yes or no? And we're just going to monitor it that way, like super lo-fi, very manual. So I'll pause there. Like, this is how I'm thinking about it. I try to reduce complexity as much as possible in experimenting, because I want to make it more palpable for people to go and do their own experiments. And I find like launching these really hard to measure things just creates a level of complexity where you actually just don't get the experiment off the ground at all.
That's very helpful.
That's
Thank
my
you.
experience. So
thank you. We've been overcomplicating things. So thank you for that insight,
good luck.
Adam.
Good luck. Other questions? We've got a few more minutes. Makesbridge, I see you posting, study the breadcrumbs. Anything like, you know, this isn't a one-way thing where like Adam talks and everyone listens. Like, we've got a lot of smart people, experts in the room on the things that they're doing too. So like,
yeah, hey,
please feel free. No, don't apologize. Like, let's hear it. Like, what are you thinking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, it's the path to conversion, all these things, you know, we just refer to them as breadcrumbs. And
yeah.
I guess I was just sort of doubling down on your comment. It's what are my highest level indicators to somebody converting, and then how do we optimize the different pathways? So
yeah, I love breadcrumbs as a way to describe it.
Yeah.
I think one thing maybe just to add on that is I find like for me, onboarding is like just a probabilities thing. It's like we think that if someone does X, they're more likely to do Y. So we're going to try to increase the number of people who do X, and we're going to see if we see that Y goes up. But it's just a big probabilities game. And what I like about that is like it reduces the stress that like you have to convert everybody, and it reduces the stress that like every experiment needs to be like this huge home run. Like granted, we want to take big swings, but I think like giving yourself a little bit of the space and being like, hey, we're just in this probabilities game. We're trying to figure out if we do this, then we'll go and do that. And, that's enough where we can predict outcomes in onboarding. Like that's an amazing place to get to. If you can actually predict if we have this top of funnel, these are how many users we're going to get at the end. That's like the holy grail of onboarding.
Yeah, for us, we do a lot of Salesforce installs, and that the thing with that is it can be a self-service deal. It's a very high leverage point for us. And then, you also brought up let's just say the juxtaposition to sales-led growth. So that's what we find is we know that Salesforce install is a big deal for us, and we always have that email or availability of online assistance to help them out.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing what we can to get them to schedule that install, because once we have that breadcrumb, so to speak, right, it's about a 75% conversion rate.
Amazing.
Into activity. And then the other one, hopefully this is helpful to everybody in the audience as well, is right, as soon as they're sending out that first email or setting up that first automation, then our close rate goes up to something like 85%.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. One on that note, like something I think about a lot is like the identity of onboarding, and like sometimes, or like I've worked with teams where they identify as like, hey, we're product experts, and so their job is to like help users use the product and like understand all the product thing. I like to think of onboarding differently. I like to think of onboarding as an accountability partner. And the reason I like to think about them that way is, I mean, PLG is a little different than SLG, but like if you're in an SLG business and you've closed a bunch of deals, like that person has signed up for a thing. I think it's totally reasonable to talk to them as a partner. And sometimes your conversations are maybe contentious. Like you don't want them to be, but it's like, hey, you signed up for this thing. We're seeing like we're really slow out of the gate. Like what's happening? Like what's happening in the business that this was so important for you 2 weeks ago, and now like I can't get you on a kickoff call. And I think if I think reframing the identity of onboarding as an accountability partner gives you more space to do things that you otherwise wouldn't do. So I don't know, just thought I'd pepper that in for the group.
Yeah, with Jamie's comment too about the untapped area with sales, right? It's just seeing that it is a consultative sale. I think that's what you're getting to. And if you're seeing there's a stall out and they had signed up, but they're not doing anything, it may not be you, it may be them. And it is an opportunity to perhaps like maybe have like a list of maybe 5 different topics that people typically get stuck on. And then you're bringing your sales consultants because they've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
And then it's an opportunity for knowledge sharing and that consultative sale, which is what we all want. You can't do it in PLG. And that's, again, that intersection with sales.
Yeah, totally. So like, if you know those things, it's like part of the sales closing motion is like, here are the 3 to 5 things you need to talk about the customer as you're closing the deal. Because we want to set expectations that like onboarding will happen. It can get done. There's a level of effort, but like, here's where you're going to get stuck. We're telling you this because everyone gets stuck here. And we're setting your expectations very, very early on the closing. Like these are things you can expect. And then you go after them as quickly as you can when that deal crosses the line and goes into the onboarding team. There's elements of that you can implement in PLG, which is, I made a comment about meeting them emotionally. So there's functional jobs to be done and then emotional jobs to be done. Those moments of like, this next step is going to be hard and you're going to feel like you can't do it. Like you can meet them where they are by just acknowledging that they exist. You just can't do it. You may not be doing it through like a human to human interaction. But I appreciate all that extra color. Thank you for coming off mute and just sharing with us. I think we're just at time. So maybe some final closing remarks, Laura, from you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. I know that we probably didn't get to a lot of the questions maybe as they had come in. But what I'll be doing is I will be kind of creating some content based on these questions that we have come in. So hopefully in the next couple months, you will have the answers to your questions. And I'll be posting in the Slack group as well, as long as along with YouTube. So hopefully your question will, be answered at some point. And thank you so much for joining us. I think this was an awesome discussion, and I'll be sending the recording out afterwards to everybody as well.